When, from the perspective of the teaching, the Nembutsu and various good practices are compared, we find the following contrasts. Easy in contrast to difficult, sudden in contrast to gradual, crosswise in contrast to lengthwise, leaping across in contrast to fording, accordant in contrast to opposing, great in contrast to small, many in contrast to few, superior in contrast to inferior, intimate in contrast to remote, close in contrast to distant, profound in contrast to shallow, strong in contrast to weak, momentous in contrast to trivial, vast in contrast to narrow, pure in contrast to mixed, direct in contrast to roundabout, quick in contrast to slow, special in contrast to general, non-retrogressive in contrast to retrogressive, straightforward exposition in contrast to incidental explanation, the name in contrast to meditative and non-meditative practices, exhaustive of truth in contrast to not exhaustive of truth, encouraged in contrast to not encouraged, uninterrupted in contrast to interrupted, unceasing in contrast to ceasing, continuous in contrast to non-continuous, unsurpassed in contrast to surpassed, highest of the high in contrast to lowest of the low, inconceivable in contrast to conceivable, resultant virtue in contrast to causal practice, Buddha's exposition in contrast to those of others, not directing merit in contrast to directing merit, protected in contrast to unprotected, witnessed in contrast to unwitnessed, praised in contrast to unpraised, entrusted in contrast to unentrusted, fully expressed teaching in contrast to that not fully expressed, able to eradicate evil in contrast to unable, selected in contrast to unselected, true in contrast to provisional, Buddha's deathlessness in contrast to Buddha's extinction, unperishing Dharma in contrast to perishing, beneficial in contrast to non-beneficial, other power in contrast to self-power, embodying the vow in contrast to not embodying the vow, practicer grasped in contrast to not grasped, practicer entering the stage of the truly settled in contrast to not entering, fulfilled land in contrast to transformed land. Such are the contrasts. However, when I consider the ocean of the one vehicle of the primal vow, I see it is the teaching that is perfect, complete, instantaneous, unhindered, absolute, and incomparable. Further, when they are compared from the perspective of the practicer, there are the following contrasts. Entrusting in contrast to doubt, good in contrast to evil, right in contrast to wrong, suitable in contrast to unsuitable, real in contrast to empty, true in contrast to false, pure in contrast to defiled, intelligent in contrast to dull, quick in contrast to slow, lofty in contrast to mean, bright in contrast to dark. Such are the contrasts. However, when I consider the practicer of the ocean of the one vehicle, I see that the one who has realized diamond-like Shinjin is the absolute and incomparable practicer. Let this be known.